pulling this line that's been on the Old Forester bottle since George Garvin Brown himself wrote it down.
What I love about it is that it's applicable, of course, to our product, but it's applicable to everything we do.
I want to have the best culture in the industry that allows people to thrive and be their best selves and perform at the top of their game.
If it's really going to be nothing better, then you have to declare it, you have to own it, and you have to name it and claim it. And that's what we're doing.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining me in the seminar Zero Proof 101 presented by Tales of the Cocktail. My name is Evelyn Chick, and I am the Regional Beverage Director for the Donnelly Group in Canada, as well as founder of Evelyn Chick Projects, a virtual hub for drink creatives, home, and beginner bartenders. I'm so excited about this topic today because this is something that I've been working on for a few years to integrate within my bar menus. And today we're going to explore the beautiful world of zero proof cocktails. It's just the tip of the iceberg if you ask me. So think about this seminar as a conscientious bartender's guide to no ABV drinks. So the reason why I want to do this seminar is because in the recent years, the food and beverage industry has seen a huge shift in consumer desires towards focus on health and wellness, premiumization in craft spirits, focus on natural foods, non-refined sugars, and the rise of interest in low and no ABV cocktails. There are full movements around the world around this topic. So I'm sure you've experienced that shift in your bars already with increased interest in additives like sherry, vermouth, kombuchas, fermentables. All of that stuff is making a comeback. And I find it so fascinating because now we can explore a totally different category outside of high proof spirits. So a wide variety of zero and low proof libations are apparent in some of the top bars in the world. And last year, obviously before COVID, I've gotten a chance to kind of travel and take a look at what others are doing in that realm. And it's becoming such an integral part of designing a well-balanced beverage program in both independent and corporate realms. Obviously, I work in a corporate setting and I have multiple venues to manage. And a lot of the times people aren't necessarily coming in just for cocktails, that they're dining. It might be groups that have a couple of people who don't necessarily imbibe. How do you create a space for them to also enjoy flavors and not just soda, etc.? So gone are the days of basic juices, simple syrups paired with sodas on the fly. And I want us to welcome these sophisticated, well thought out temperance, zero proof, placebo, however you want to call them, cocktails that are complex and if not more than our high proof creations. So zero proof shouldn't really be an afterthought, but something that a conscientious bartender should spend time studying, developing, and working into a regular menu, just like your rare and high proof pours. So as drink makers, bar managers, event coordinators, guest experience curators, it's not really only within our best interest, but our duty to provide better options to help curate a social space that is fun, exciting, safe, and inclusive, especially during this time of COVID where there are so many restrictions and rules we have to care for within our spaces. It's very important to have offerings that will allow for guests to drink in moderation, maybe take a little bit of a break after they've had 3 cocktails, 4 cocktails, whatnot, and slide in a little no or low ABV delight so they can still continue that enjoyment without having to sacrifice that experience. So if everyone does their part in contributing and leading the no and low ABV movements, our bar can and will become safer spaces for patrons from all walks of life to visit. So I'm going to do things a little bit backwards here and really dig into the why. I know I've kind of went through it, but just kind of digging into the why and talk about how to execute a non-alcoholic cocktail list. So 5 years ago, the non-alcoholic category just did not exist. Since 2018, 50 plus non-alcoholic products that are not only fridge, but shelf stable have launched, mostly in the UK and Europe, where the demand is higher. And that is because through market research, statistically, alcohol consumption has declined in the past few years. A study by University College in London found that the proportion of 16 to 24-year-olds, which is the younger crowd, who do not imbibe increased from 18% in 2005 to 29% in 2015. And this is just kind of going upwards. The no and low movement is not a trend, but an integral part of the drink's evolution as people dig into more sustainable and healthy lifestyles. Even for myself, going to a coffee shop or going out and having beverages, I've found that I've chosen things that have a less sugar content to it. And I've found that my consumer palates, especially in Canada, have gotten a little bit more dry and a little bit more bitter. So imagine going to a bar with one person who do not imbibe. Is that bar menu without listed options going to encourage them to order something that's a bit more adventurous, or are they going to stick with their regular soda? So we are in the service industry, which is an industry of making guests feel welcome within our spaces that we've curated, whether it's a dive bar, lounge, restaurant, cocktail bar, and whatnot. Just because a guest isn't imbibing due to personal, cultural, or lifestyle choices doesn't mean that they have to succumb to something basic and boring. So you're actually isolating their experience by not thinking about the options to serve them. I'm very lucky last year that I got to consult on a pretty large project, a beverage group that wanted to offer non-alcoholic options. And they've been purchasing these little Italian sodas that normally costed them $2.10 to buy, and they're selling them for like $9 or $10. But I put in a program that allowed for a lower cost alternative, introducing some different types of sodas that I'm going to talk about later, some kombuchas, and some mixes that uses different acidifiers. And now their program is super interesting, and they've found that the non-alcoholic consumption has actually increased because this one specific venue is actually in a mall. So when you think about it, people have to drive there, and it's definitely illegal and unsafe for people to drive while they're drunk. So these options allow for the guest check to be a little bit higher and for them to experience a delightful meal with something that's flavorful. So now they've gotten a couple ideas in your head about the drinks you want to make. What do they look like? How do you communicate the zero ABV aspect of the drink? Language is super important within that menu that you're curating, and also within the space that you're curating. So for me, I think it's time to 86 the word mocktails. Hence, this seminar is named Zero Proof 101. It allows for a better language surrounding the term and removes the stigma from someone who don't necessarily want to drink at that particular time. So providing better menu representation for zero or low proof drinks without having to isolate and identify the non-imbibing guests removes the stigma surrounding ordering something that is viewed as less desirable. So imagine this scenario where a guest comes to your bar and they have to whisper to the bartender and say, "Hey, I'm not drinking today. Can you please give me something that looks like another drink?" Like that already diminishes a little bit of the experience that they could have had at your bar, whereas you could have just provided something that is beautiful, complex, and on the menu for them to order, so they don't feel like they're the only person not having fun within that environment. If you're going to put all that effort into a beverage that contains alcohol, why devalue something that is probably lower cost, as I mentioned, that would potentially make you more money and also cater to a larger clientele? And talking about non-alcoholic serves surrounding the language around that. A lot of the staff training that I've done previously isn't necessarily like, oh, don't ask the non-alcoholic drinker what they want to drink, just because you can just grab whatever in your back bar to make them something on the fly. I educate my staff to at least sort of go through the realms, how they would ask a guest if they like their cocktail a certain way. So if a guest asks for a non-alcoholic cocktail, not only am I a little bit more welcoming in that sense, I always say, "Oh, what kind of flavors are you particular to? Would you like something stirred or shaken?" Because yes, you can make stirred non-alcoholic cocktails, and we'll explore it in just a second. How do you like, the sweetness levels within your drink? Are there any flavors that you particularly don't like or gravitate towards. All of this is just to make that environment surrounding that person who's not necessarily imbibing feel more welcome. I often despise the word mocktail because it's not a mock-up of a cocktail, or virgin. And virgin just sounds kind of gross. So I stopped using that language and think about different proper language that you can use to make your menu sound a little bit more interesting for non-alcoholic cocktail drinkers. So now that we explored the why, let's look into how to build a non-alcoholic serve. As a young bartender, I've definitely been guilty that whenever a non-alcoholic order comes in, I reach for the closest syrup, slap some citrus and soda on it, and call it a day. I definitely want you to challenge yourself because there's so much out there. So when you look at your existing bar program and you want to build on the aspects of the syrups and the cordials and whatever you're carrying, how do you look at that without sacrificing quality, taking away the booze from the non-alcoholic cocktail you're trying to build? So when you take away the booze, you take away a lot of texture, length, bitter qualities. So following your traditional spec don't necessarily work. This is when I start looking at some things that can enhance the drink outside of the realm that you would normally reach for. So say you have your base sour recipe. You have your 2-ounce spirit, 0.5 modifier, 0.5 citrus or fruit, and then an optional lengthener or bitters. So once you remove the spirit, because it provides so many more things that give you complexity, maybe some bitterness, spices, and texture. So you're left with a too short, not complex, too sweet, shitty juice lengthener, non-alcoholic cocktail that is not interesting. So with texture and length, this is a couple things that I've explored that I found very useful. First is looking at different types of lengtheners that allows for also a texture change. So looking at something like whey. It is also sort of a no-waste product. So sometimes when the kitchen, say if you have the luxury to work with back of house on something that you can provide, whey is a cheese byproduct that allows for that like kind of viscosity you'll get from certain alcohols. Kombuchas is a fantastic thing. Tepaches, anything that's fermentable will also allow for a different texture and a different flavor to go into a non-alcoholic cocktail rather than just your regular soda. We would definitely be careful about the ABV levels of kombuchas and tepaches, and I'll touch on that a little bit later because some people are not necessarily not imbibing because of choice. They may be allergic to ethyl alcohol or they're allergic to fermentables, sulfites, etc. So definitely be careful and proceed with caution when you are using ingredients like this. But something like a kombucha also offers a different type of acidity, and that will really kind of help elevate your non-alcoholic cocktail game. Another thing that I really like to do is look at different acidifiers. I love using verjus in my non-alcoholic cocktails, and I think it's nice because it gives you that really different mouthfeel and a different citrus component within your beverage without adding just citrus. And I've actually had guests tell me that they're allergic to lemons and limes before. So verjus is pressed unripened grape musk, which is can act as something that will help balance your cocktail in that citrus component. I always look into teas and herbs. Obviously, you know, when you're familiar with vermouth, you're familiar with classic cocktails, there's so many sort of like bittering agents, roots, herbal qualities that come from that. So how do you kind of create something that will allow for those herbal qualities to come out without digging into non-alcoholic distillates yet? So at a bar that I used to run, we've created actually something called a no maro and a no pari. That is a mock-up of sort of the flavor profile of an amaro and a vermouth. So I've taken a couple different teas that I found in various different markets and cooked it into a tea concentrate. Sweetened it with natural sugars and added a food grade glycerin for texture. So this product obviously isn't shelf stable, but it is fridge stable for 2 weeks because of the preservatives that I've added to it. So this is something that you can think of to add bitter and complexity to the non-alcoholic cocktails that you're creating. It's kind of thinking about like the modifiers in a way where it doesn't come in just the form of sugar. So how I created that no Maro and the no Pari is kind of looking at those particular spirits, break down how it would taste and what flavors I want to pick out of it. So that kind of thinking about that will kind of perpetuate you in a different direction than just cooking, say, a simple syrup or a 2 or 3 ingredient syrup. Want to talk about non-alcoholic distillates a little bit, because there's so many in the market right now, and there's a few that I think just does fantastically. So everyone's obviously very familiar with Seedlip. If you haven't, definitely check it out. So Seedlip is a non-alcoholic distillate created in the UK, and there's a few different types. The Grove 42 has sort of got this like orangey allspice element to it. The Garden 108 is sort of got the snap pea thyme element to it, and the Spice 94 is sort of like clovey, allspice. All those are not meant to be drank alone. It's supposed to enhance your particular cocktail a different way, just so it adds a little bit more complexity than just water or dilution. 3 Spirit is really interesting. I think it is probably one of those first no alcohol beverages that came out that I was like, oh my God, this is something that can inspire me to do a non-alcoholic cocktail that is just beyond syrup and juices. So it's made with the help of resident botanical alchemists as looking to create a plant-based non-alcoholic beverage. So there's 11 plant-based ingredients in 3 Spirits around the world, including lion's mane, cacao, and yerba mate, which I think is so interesting. The bitter note, another one of those kind of more bitter additives, these are all shelf stable, which is awesome, is a non-alcoholic Italian herbal liqueur that will do well in stirred cocktails. Think about someone who doesn't do well with sweet cocktails and you handed them a stirred non-alcoholic herbaceous number. That kind of gives you a hand up in sort of creating that experience, because it really shows the diversity that these spirit-free tipples can offer. So all these different non-alcoholic distillates, I think, when you taste them, it kind of tastes a little bit different than how you would imagine, obviously, with something that contains a proof. But I usually dissect it like how I would a high proof spirit. So what is this contributing to the balance of the cocktail? So say for the Seedlip Grove 42, if I want to pick out the sort of like orange aspect of it and I want to highlight those particular flavors, then I look at what can contribute to those flavors to enhance this non-alcoholic drink that I'm going to create. The thing about non-alcoholic beverages is not that you can base it on a classic, because there aren't any non-alcoholic classics. So it kind of gives you the freedom to really carry out your creativity in these beautiful cocktails that just happen to be 0 proof. And I think in the mindset of thinking about 0 proof cocktails, you just have to do that. It's not like you can take, say, a Manhattan, substitute the vermouth with an Amaro, and then that kind of becomes a black Manhattan, and then something else to add to that, and then it adds another realm of flavor. The base that you're creating these non-alcoholic with is completely different than any spirit you will ever taste. So you really kind of have to dig into the flavors within those ingredients that you are putting together and how that contributes to complementing each other, and then you find the balance from that. So in terms of a non-alcoholic blueprint, it's very interesting because you don't have a base spirit to go, okay, there's 2 ounces here, and if I adjust the additives and sugar, this is what it's going to do to those 2 ounces. So if you were to use Seedlip as a base for your non-alcoholic cocktail, whatever you're adding to it isn't just to highlight those particular flavors, but all those ingredients as a whole will give you a balanced drink. Does that make sense? It's a kind of crazy concept to think about, but when people come and ask me for a non-alcoholic blueprint, can't really tell them because there really isn't one. So this is such a fun category to explore. Another one I don't have up here is the Italian vermouth company Martini just released a booze-free aperitivos, the Vibrante and the Ferrale, which is zero proof expressions of the same wines as their Martini vermouths, but it has the alcohol removed and the leftover liquid is infused with botanicals. So all these larger companies are really catching on to the trend that is here to stay. And I think it's really fantastic. My partner actually doesn't imbibe. So when we go out, there are so many more things that we can explore on a menu that is well thought out, with the beautiful food that we're having, and doesn't mean that he feels isolated in that experience by just drinking soda water. So I want to talk about other complexity and bitter qualities that you can add to it. I would definitely try to explore different cultures in terms of looking at herbal things that you can add within your mixes. So growing up in Hong Kong, gentian is a huge part of my diet. Like we had gentian teas, we would cook it in soups, and there's just like that unexplainable bitterness that comes from gentian that I think is really, really interesting. Orris root, angelica root, those two are actually botanicals that are quite familiar in gin, and you can find it in your local market as a dried product. And that actually adds a really cool amount of acidity and complexity within that non-alcoholic ingredient you're trying to create as well. Another thing is looking at different berries, so like hawthorn berries, goju berries, gooseberries, something that is not necessarily easily found in your local supermarket, but when you dig into it, there's medicinal properties, and it also gives it that really nice like texture and this other set of complexities within your drink. So exploring these different routes just outside of the realm that you can reach will really help you create something that's new and interesting. Alternative sweeteners is a huge thing. So instead of just thinking about white sugar, simple syrup, think about stuff like honey, dates. Dates are great sort of textural enhancer for your drinks as well. Fruit jams, molasses, maple, obviously coming from Canada, we have so many different types of maple syrup, and they're absolutely delicious. It adds another type of complexity in your drink as well. Maybe even balsamic. The possibilities are really endless. So the next time you're reaching for a sugar behind your bar to create a non-alcoholic drink, maybe think about just different sweeteners. So all of that pulled together, you'll get something that you're not necessarily familiar with, but all those flavors that you find in beautiful Amaros, beautiful whiskey, all that is actually contained within that drink, just in very different formats. So now we've talked about the intention of zero proof cocktails, and we've talked about diverse flavor profiles. Next, we need to talk about attentiveness. So building a non-alcoholic drink, we kind of have to know what non-alcoholic drink means. So I want to break down ABVs. A no alcohol or alcohol-free beverage means altogether there's not more than 0.05% ABV. A de-alcoholized beverage is over 0.05%, but it has to be less than 0.5% ABV. A low alcohol cocktail is actually not more than 1.2% ABV. So if somebody comes to your bar and they want a low ABV drink, and you make them something that is a 1 ounce, 40% proof drink, you're not actually making them a low alcohol cocktail. And a light alcohol cocktail or a light alcohol beverage is actually 2.8% to 3.5%. So when you think about it, there's a lot of things you have to be aware of when you are making these cocktails, because as I mentioned before, some people might actually be allergic to ethyl alcohol, or there's different types of allergens within those particular ferments that you put out there. I put a photo here on a wild tonic kombucha that's actually 5.6%, and it's super delicious, but that's not a non-alcoholic option. So when you look at kind of lengthening your drink with different alternatives like kombucha, even non-alcoholic beers or different ferments, definitely check out the ABV value. A lot of people always reach for bitters as a flavor enhancer. And you could get away with it, but you definitely have to be very wary as to what bitters do to a beverage in terms of ABV. So as I mentioned previously, there are so many bittering agents you can find out there, and now there's a lot of shelf-stable, non-alcoholic distillates that you can find. Reaching for a bitter is definitely something that you can do, but that's sort of digging into the curating a space, a safe space for your customer. You need to find out not necessarily why they're not drinking, but ask a simple questions. Are you okay with bitters? Because a lot of people aren't. It may be something that can trigger some other issues that could come up. So bitters carry ABV. Let's say there's 120 dashes in a 200 ml bottle of Angostura, right? And I put an example up here because this sounds like a delicious cocktail. Pineapple juice, chai tea, simple syrup, lemon juice. So we have the sort of chai tea and pineapple juice as your quote unquote base that will offer you like a tropical but allspice element to it. And then you got your simple and lemon juice to offer some balance. And then the Angostura is to enhance that chai tea, right? So pineapple, allspice, cloves, all that come together. That's delicious. And that's kind of the little bit of, you know, pineapple and rum goes really well together because of those particular elements. So if you put 4 dashes of Angostura bitters in this cocktail, so 4 dashes mildly equals to 6.25 mil or 0.83 bar spoon of the 40% alcohol, you're actually getting a total of 1.6% total ABV in this drink, which is actually a low alcohol cocktail. And are you actually giving someone a no ABV drink? So something like that you should pay attention to, just because like the intention of a low ABV drinker can be very different. So if you don't know how to measure ABV, it's actually really simple. It's just the volume of alcoholic ingredient times the ABV percentage, in this case 40%, divided by the sum of ingredients, times it by 100, and that gives you your percentage. So everyone's like, oh my God, Fee Brothers, it doesn't have an ABV to it. It's fake news. Don't believe it. Some bitters out there definitely carry 0 ABV because they can use glycerin to pull out flavors. But in terms of Fee Brothers, check out the ABV and research it before you use it, because it can range from anywhere from 1.2%. Actually, the old-fashioned aromatic bitters, I believe, is a higher proof, 14%. So we want to make sure to be aware of all these allergies, perhaps medical conditions associated with alcohol, and most importantly, triggers. And these different mistakes is, I'm sure, innocent, but I definitely think that when you're approaching a low ABV or a 0 proof program, all these different aspects of it needs to be accounted for. So I want to talk a little bit about diversifying your revenue streams, just because, you know, I'm again trying to really drill it into everyone's heads that this is something that is worth investing in. So I've worked with a lot of bar managers and owners, and they're like, well, why do we have to have this? It actually doesn't make any money. People are sitting in those seats where they could be buying drinks. And I think that's a very sort of erroneous way to think about it. This is business that you can potentially lose by not participating in guest needs and desires. As I mentioned previously, so say a group of people are going out drinking and there's one DD, or one person who's pregnant, or one person who simply chooses not to imbibe. Their business is actually like just as important, if not more, to the particular venue. So say if they went online and researched your menu and they saw that, you know, you only offered drinks of alcoholic, you only offer drinks with a high alcohol percentage, or you only offer drinks that contain alcohol, and there's nothing sort of there for that particular person to choose, they might go and pick another venue that has that particular offering, or, you know, has some food offerings that they would prefer, and forego your space because of that choice. So by putting in work back of house, this is like a really lucrative manner to enhance business and satisfy everyone's cultural, personal, and lifestyle needs. Your clientele reach is higher, and you can definitely have revenue coming in without the liability. So with cost management for non-alcoholic drinks, break it down like how you would an alcoholic beverage. So calculate your ounces of lime juice, your ounces of lemon juice, your dashes of non-alcoholic glycerin-based bitters, and your non-alcoholic distillates, like how you would a regular cocktail. And you'll find that the profit margin for those is pretty high, and it's going to help you with cost management within your particular cocktail menu. And I think that's important to say because that will definitely be worth your business for putting effort into it, and also it definitely just makes make your menu a little bit more interesting. So when we pull it all together, what is the purpose of a zero proof cocktail menu? Don't slap something together with whatever you can find. Give the non-alcoholic drinks some value and input as you would any other drink. We've covered a little bit about different bittering agents you can use, different sugar alternatives. All those things will actually make your base cocktail menu a lot more interesting because now you've gone beyond just prepping for simple syrups or prepping for infusions. Again, with the non-alcoholic category, infusions are definitely something that is tricky and probably won't necessarily work in the sense that it would for high proof spirits. So all these different things, if you're bringing in kombuchas that you can probably sell on your own or have a cocktail program that allows for that expansion, your base cocktail program will actually be more interesting. We talk about palate. A great drink tells a story through its flavor. So make sure it hits all the right points. So we explored some bittering agents, we explored some sugaring agents, and then we also explored additives and non-alcoholic distillates. Is the drink interesting from beginning to end as it would an alcoholic beverage? And I think that's really important because when you're thinking about drinking a sugared citrus soda, there's really no beginning at the end. All you're tasting is that particular sugar, is that particular citrus, and some bubbly. So if you're looking at a complex build of a non-alcoholic cocktail, I think you can really sort of explore all these different realms that you don't normally reach for. Take pride in your non-alcoholic cocktail program. Don't look at it as a lesser thing, and that's so important. Find new language, train your staff or train yourself to 86 the word mocktails or virgin cocktails, and take pride in making space for those particular individuals who aren't imbibing for whatever reason it is, whether or not it be cultural, personal, or health. So I want to end sort of this seminar in a lot of different examples that I found either on the internet or the different bars that I've experienced, traveling, just kind of to see what non-alcoholic cocktails look like nowadays. Listen Bar is a non-alcoholic pop-up based out of New York City, and it is just such a beautiful space because the music is just as good. You have all these different language, you have all these different like really kind of inclusive language around the serves of the non-alcoholic drinks. And it's such a cool concept because it kind of just gives you the idea as to how, you know, a social space can be curated without the use of alcohol. Not to say that like, don't drink alcohol or don't have that at all. It's not about not drinking, but it's about providing options for people who just need to take a break or aren't imbibing at the moment. So check out Listen Bar. It's great. There are a couple menus here from, you know, venues that I really appreciate. The Savoy Songbook, the non-alcoholic cocktails look amazing. Seedlip is in a lot of them. And it's also sort of how you present it as well. So instead of listing, you know, this syrup or this soda, they list the flavors that they carry within those particular homemade ingredients. So here we have, it says Seedlip Grove, burnt barley, smoke, honey soda. So that gives it this like really sort of interesting way of presenting a non-alcoholic cocktail by allowing people to visualize what those flavors actually look like in their palate. It sounds delicious. Pineapple and cinnamon shrub. Shrubs are also like a really interesting thing that, you know, I felt was on trend a few years ago, and then it sort of disappeared. But I feel like it's making a comeback again because shrubs are actually really good for your health with the vinegar that will help with digestion, et cetera, et cetera. And for this, I believe this is from a pop-up from White Lion, the Royal Bermuda Yacht Club. Sounds delicious. So they've listed sort of your alcoholic version, or it goes, and they listed booze list right underneath with your choice of seedless spice and garden. So making the non-alcoholic serve the same sort of in the same category as your alcoholic serves, and also putting them into the same regard as your alcoholic serves will also help elevate the fact that these are just as good cocktails, if not better. I pulled the menu from Dante, so best bar a couple years ago in the world. They have a beautiful non-alcoholic menu with different tonics, shrubs, and mules, etc. And you'll see that when you go down the list, all these flavors are drastically different. So there's something that's tropical, there's something that's savory, there's something that is with coffee, and there's also a hot option, which I think is really interesting. So putting it right beside sort of a spritz menu will allow for that placement to be really visible to people who are not necessarily imbibing. And it's not just sort of tucked in the corner underneath the coffee section that just says pop. So as you can see, the coffee and the prepared non-alcoholic serves are actually under the beautifully created menu. Another one of another venue that I really like was the Dandelion, and Dandelion had a beautiful non-alcoholic menu. So as you can see, catering to the way that they present their alcoholic drinks, they have the little sort of description as to what the non-alc serve should taste like, and then they have what glass it serves in. Is it refreshing, or is it something a little bit darker, and then the price beside it. And I would definitely look at the pricing like how you would price a regular cocktail. If you're pricing your non-alcoholic serves much, much lower than your regular cocktail offerings, you're actually diminishing its worth. So let's just say the Nomaro I mentioned earlier takes 24 hours to make because it's a tea reduction, tea concentrate that needs to reduce for a certain amount of time, like how you would reduce the balsamic vinegar. And then glycerin is added to it for stabilization, and then it needs to go in the bottle to stabilize again. So when you're making these non-alcoholic ingredients, put the same amount of love that you would within those, and that acting as a base for your serves will be much more complex and way better tasting than you would just throwing some sugars and base ingredients together. So think about the placement of your non-alcoholic drinks within your cocktail as well, and see kind of how that could fit into the mosaic of your program and not just kind of shoved in a corner. I put this on there because I really liked it. And it's very much towards the aesthetics of the bar and like the theme of the bar. So this is definitely Asian inspired. There's a homemade Thai tea kaffir lime syrup. And that, instead of just doing, you know, the syrup soda, there's a house whipped coconut cream. And this is something that, again, will add texture and also add like a really cool visual aspect to it as well. Jackfruit colada, that sounds amazing. So non-alcoholic cocktails can definitely still adhere to the theme of your bar. Just got to be a little bit more creative about it. And the last menu I want to show you is, you know, one of the bars that I used to run, and that's something that, you know, I take a lot of pride in. We've called the cocktails placebo. It's actually one of our chef's friends who came up with the language around non-alcoholic cocktails, because he's like a pretty large man. He's just sick of going into a bar and asking for something that is a mocktail. So we asked him, what language would you prefer for us to use if you were to order a non-alcoholic delight? And he said placebo, and made sense. And I was like, I'm sticking to it. That's awesome. So as you can see on this menu, there's a couple ferments there and a no marrow that I was mentioning earlier. Those are the tea concentrates that we've cooked with different botanicals. The red no marrow kind of mimics Campari, so I've used tea as a base. So there's some hibiscus in there. There's a lot of different types of roots, including gentian and hawthorn berries. There's goji berries, dried grapefruit peels, and that kind of caters to a more soft, floral, amaro like non-alcoholic serve, whereas the no marrow is super bitter. It comes with it's sweetened with molasses, and there's cinchona bark in it, kind of how I would cook a house tonic, but instead of just using those particular flavors and making it light and fresh, I made it super dark, sweetened it with molasses, stabilized it with glycerin, and that way it created this non-alcoholic beverage that you can sip on your own, and also it would make a really fantastic sort of amaro spritz-like cocktail. And verjus is on there. Verjus acts as a acidifier for a drink called Thoughts, which is actually served tall, and instead of just the soda citrus and top it up with whatever garnish you can find, it's really well thought out with seedlip spice as a quote-unquote base. But with that particular non-alcoholic distillate, we only used an ounce of it just because it's so herbal and it's so potent that if you add 2 ounces of it, it kind of overpowers everything. So only added an ounce of seedlip to it, and I made this apple, celery, black pepper, coriander syrup that I've acidified with citric acid to sort of find the balance between that and verjus, because verjus gives it this sort of grapey, unripened, beautiful minerality to it, but it doesn't have enough acidity to sort of balance the whole drink out. So kind of thinking about different acidifiers that will layer on top of each other to give you that balance would if you were to add 1 ounce of lemon juice. So I think this is sort of a really interesting way to look at building a non-alcoholic serve and placing it right where your menu is. And this is sort of, where I think non-alcoholic cocktails are going, instead of just something that is thrown together like a faux mosa, which I've heard lots of, or a virgin margarita, which I don't even know how people do that, but a virgin mojito or something like that. Something that is a little bit more interesting and kind of uses all sorts of botanicals and can potentially be a zero sugar non-alcoholic serve is sort of the trend that all these different places are going to go to. And I think it's because, anyone can just throw together some juice, like any home bartender can, and some soda. But if you're at a bar, people are paying for an elevated experience. And for an elevated experience, you kind of just have to do a little bit of homework back of house and see what you can create out of this sort of really diverse realm in non-alcoholic cocktails. And this slide shows you just what I'm talking about. If you Google mocktails, everything that comes up are these fruit juice. I see this gummy bear, champagne flute thing. I mean, there's nothing wrong with that. There's definitely a time and a place for different cocktails that look like this. But if every mocktail that goes out in your venue looks like this, then imagine someone who just don't want to be identified as a person who's not drinking. There's a specific look that you're trying to cater to, right? And then on the right here, there's 2 beautiful cocktails from my previous bar, Pretty Ugly, that is stirred on a clear ice cube. And that's something that I feel like not a lot of people can think of when they think of non-alcoholic drinks. And the No Marrow Spritz is right beside it. It's beautifully presented. It looks dark. It looks like an Amaro. It looks like something that could be on our cocktail menu, which in my previous bar is very sort of agave spirit heavy and a lot of vermouth and Marrow heavy. So if you think about presenting non-alcoholic cocktails in a way where it could blend in with your alcoholic serves, this whole movement, this whole making your space inclusive and allowing for more complex flavors to come through, whether or not you put alcohol in a drink, will elevate the level of your bar and will also help with your clientele that's coming in. And I think, in the next few years, we're going to see more and more non-alcoholic distillates come out. At our local cocktail emporium, they have these beautiful, fantastic non-alcoholic Prosecco that I've been starting to add to my Nomaro make to make sort of a Nomaro spritz that's actually crazy good. And sometimes you might just need a little bit of break from alcohol that you don't know yet, that you don't know about. So having these options are definitely going to elevate your bar game. And I hope that this seminar can help you explore these different flavors out there. And thank you so much for attending. And we'll see you again soon.